And the result of this is, as we discussed earlier, that if you look at the major areas of technological revolution of our time, there are many other examples, a couple here. Europe can't act because it can't act as a collective, and the member states aren't big enough. They don't have the resources to match the US or China in these sectors. And the same problem arises in deciding how to deal strategically with Russia, because they don't share interests and views, they don't share resources. It ultimately depends on member states, while the EU as a whole has vastly greater human and material resources than Russia. It doesn't matter if it can't be mobilized. So the EU's stuck because it is inevitably, because of its history, a best half-formed entity, and it's finding it very, very, very difficult to go beyond that. Remember, the last big act of European integration was the Maastricht Treaty, which was agreed in 1991, and that's 34 years ago. I mean, that just shows you how difficult it is to make progress.
It does. And I think one thing that I'm curious as we begin to wrap for this is looking ahead, Martin. Obviously, in the previous conversation we had back in July, one of the questions or debates we were having was about fragmentation. You've referenced it, but also sort of blocks and whether we're returning to regionalization. And one of these things, obviously, the EU is the epitome of blocks, but I'm curious how you see that working. Can blocks become more stable, or are they inherently brittle? Can we see Trump's efforts to undermine it from the outside, the internal divisions that I'm getting specifically? I'm thinking about migration, because right now we have a debate going on in the EU about how to tackle migration across the continent, but with the inevitable acceptance that migration is a critical component of any successful and sustaining economy. So sort of a two-pronged question there, but about fragmentation of blocks, but also specifically how migration helps with.
Well, I think I'll start with the latter. It does seem to me the obvious point. The EU is committed to free movement, and that is one of the great achievements of the EU, the commitment to free movement internally. But that means that decisions of member state on immigration, which will lead in the long run to permanent settlement and citizenship, affects all of them, because it means that the people who go to live in, say, France and become French, as they should. I don't believe that people should be allowed to live somewhere forever without the benefits of citizenship, have the right to live everywhere. So it's perfectly obvious that immigration is a shared issue. It is also clear that the member states of the EU have very different views, so they're all getting more suspicious of immigration abroad from outside the EU, very different views, and reaching a common view is incredibly difficult, though most of them share, to some extent, the need for immigrants, particularly skilled ones. That's a separate issue. But this is clearly very, 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 very sensitive territory. And of course, the inability to reach a common policy, and we've seen this just now, I think fascinating, the Mercosur issue,